interesting piece out in Yahoo News today. The headline reads, "Young black voters say they aren't enthusiastic about a Joe Biden presidency." Now, this is not shocking, even in the slightest, obviously. Here is a quote from somebody who criticized Joe Biden for not supporting the, quote, defund the police movement. So he said, quote, "You got black youth across the country calling for defunding the police and thinking differently about law enforcement. And a couple days later, in the midst of all the protests, Biden's campaign says, quote, 'Let's spend more money on community policing,'" Green told USA Today. And so this is true, and I believe Biden wants to increase the police budget. Joe Biden is not somebody who is big on these kinds of things, and especially with this campaign strategy, he certainly isn't going to, there's no real leverage for him for people who are, black people who are trying to push him more in a more regulatory of law enforcement direction, because they don't really have any leverage. Because if you say that you're going to withhold your vote from Joe Biden, which is the only real leverage you can have against Joe Biden, you're a Hitler supporter. So you have no leverage. There's nothing you can do, pretty much. You have to vote for Joe Biden because, hey, otherwise Donald Trump is going to win. So they have absolutely no leverage. Joe Biden can just shit on those people all he wants, because at the end of the day, what are they going to do? They have no recourse except not voting, but they'll get, ruthlessly shamed for that and be, Hitler supporters, I guess. This is with the November election 4 months away. Polling shows Biden's support with younger black voters trailing significantly behind that of older black voters. And while polls show the majority of young black voters support Biden over President Trump, many are unenthusiastic at best or hesitant at worst. So basically the numbers that come out, it's about 50-50 actually split on the reasons why they are actually voting for Joe Biden. And half of them say it's because they want Joe Biden. Half of them say, oh, it's just basically to take down Donald Trump. Here it says, a recent Washington Post/Ipsos poll published in June found that 92% of black registered voters said they planned to vote for Biden in November, but it was a near even split as to why. 50% of the black registered voters surveyed said it was mainly because they opposed Trump, while 49% said they mainly support Biden. So this is very obvious. So the numbers when it comes to young African Americans in terms of the support is really low. But as you guys remember, the group that really carried the election for Joe Biden was black voters, and that's because, just like any other voting bloc, right? It's mostly made up of older voters, right? So why would the black vote be any different? It's carried by mostly older voters, and those older voters are, they say that they're moderate, but I'm not so sure that they're really moderate, because polls always come out, polls in every state said that they supported Medicare for all. So are they really moderate, or is it when Jim Clyburn and all of the Democratic leadership, of black Americans in the South, whether it be Jim Clyburn or John Lewis, they're endorsing people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and that's kind of the direction they're going to go in, because they look to leadership, just like the African American community has done in the past, especially because they would have to congregate because they're being oppressed so much. And so are they really moderate? I'm not convinced, actually. I really am not, although, maybe they are. But Joe Biden obviously had a ton of default support. It would have been really interesting from a political science perspective, or just any, political perspective in general, to see who would have secured the black vote and how much of it had Joe Biden not been running, because nobody else had that default support. Joe Biden it was a cakewalk to the election. He didn't do anything to win the election. He started out with a massive lead. He didn't campaign in any Super Tuesday states. He literally did nothing. He was broke, too. He said it himself. And he still won. A lot had to do with Bernie not liking negative campaigning. That's kind of a catastrophic equation for Bernie Sanders. You're running against someone with a ton of default support, but you don't like negative campaigning. Those are kind of clashing, Those two things are kind of clashing with each other. So that obviously didn't pan out very well for Bernie, obviously. But, I hope that the younger African Americans become a bigger voting bloc, that they start exerting pressure and take voting more seriously, because, you know, they're the most disenfranchised of all. You know, it's a young African Americans, probably the most disenfranchised, you know, voting group in the U.S., and so it's kind of tough. But if they could start exerting more force, and hopefully we can convince some of the older black voters to start voting more progressive. But, you know, a lot of this really just has to do with something kind of like, you know, Obama wasn't even really winning the black vote, to my understanding, until Oprah really started campaigning for him a lot. You know, Hillary was securing it for a while, because, as you guys remember, what's the joke about Bill Clinton? That he was the first black president, you know? So it's not even necessarily about being black. It's like securing something there. Like, you just had to find something. Like, Joe Biden was Obama's vice president, so that automatically puts it in the bag for him. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens after this election, to see where it goes. But I think in general, you know, the thing that has been blocking Bernie Sanders' nomination is obviously uncontroversial to say. It's just based on stats. You know, as older African-American voters sort of really coming out in droves to vote for Bernie's opponent. So I think that's something that progressives need to take very seriously and figure out a way to convince those voters, or figure out how to deal with that. Because otherwise the progressives won't be able to win the presidency. And it'll be a really big deal if we could start making some shift. And, you know, in like South Carolina Democratic primary, the majority of voters are African American, you know. And that's where Bernie didn't even win a county. He got destroyed so bad. So, you know, progressives got to figure something out with that. Figure out what's going on. Now, it's a bit of a complex situation, as I just explained to you. But, yeah, it would be tough for me to believe that young black voters are excited about a Joe Biden presidency, let alone literally anybody, by the way. Literally anybody. I don't know why they would be excited about that. But, yeah, so kind of not a shocking story here. But young African-American voters not really messing with Joe Biden's presidency.